Bismillah.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Very happy again to have everyone join us for another chapter of the Shama'il. And again, for those of you who may be joining us for the first time, or if it's been a little while, the Shama'il is a classic text. It is compiled by one of the great scholars, imams in Islamic history, Imam at-Tirmidhi, and it's a collection of ahadith that are specific to the very, very special characteristics of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And there is a really well done version of this very important text that was made for the benefit of young people. And so we are just going through this. CD Siraj, Mowjood and myself, there are 20 chapters in this book, and subhanAllah, it's amazing how we've gone through this. It seems like we just started, but we are now in chapter 14. So today we start chapter 14, which is on the topic of the Prophet ﷺ's modesty. So we're going to go through this inshallah. And in like all the chapters in this book, or just the chapters and the topics that are covered in the Shama'il, some of these have so many deep meanings, and of course there's books and books that are written upon that are written on for all these things that go into much greater detail. Our intent inshallah is to try to do the best we can to help us understand some of the key concepts inshallah for young hearts and for others as well. So let's get started inshallah. So the first thing to note, like we typically do, is what does modesty mean? And in Arabic, there's a beautiful word that we use for modesty, which is haya. And one thing that is pointed out in the book, which is really important, is that it's a very similar word and the same root word for the term that we use for life. So life means haya, and haya is a very similar word. And if we think about what the meaning of that is, we'll see, as we go on with some of the topics that are covered in this, is that really life is really about modesty, right? We can't live an Islamic life. We can't live a life in accordance to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his Prophet ﷺ have asked us to do unless we live a life of modesty. Now, what does modesty mean? So let's talk about that for a minute, inshallah. So the first thing I wanted to share is that there's a hadith, a saying of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he says, and this is a very, very important hadith, that the followers of every religion have a hallmark or defining characteristic. And what that means is that the followers of every religion have a certain special thing, a certain trademark, a certain quality. And that defining characteristic in this hadith, that defining characteristic of Islam, which is our way of life, is haya. So again, it gives us the importance of how important modesty is. So what is haya? So a couple of things that we wanted to share, inshallah. One is that it is the feeling that people experience in certain situations that causes us to walk away from improper actions and behaviors, right? So we may have experienced this in our life. It doesn't matter where you are. You could be in a gathering of people that may not share the same values that you do. You may be in a group of even friends, or even people that are close to you. And sometimes we hear things that make us really, really uncomfortable, right? So that feeling is really, really important. That's a feeling of haya. When we feel that feeling in our heart, then it's a feeling of haya. There's something unnatural about situations that are not good for us. And that feeling that we have when we want to remove ourselves from that feeling is a feeling of haya. So feeling uncomfortable about either doing something wrong or offending another person, right? So if you feel uncomfortable about that, again, that's a feeling of haya. That's a very good thing. That's a blessing. That's a blessing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us. It's a gift. When we feel that way, that's definitely a gift that we have from Allah that we should appreciate. So again, when we feel that, that's haya. And then another thing, which is important, which some of you may have heard the term haya in this context, is that it is the quality that prevents a person from exposing our aura. What is our aura? An aura is those are parts of our body that must be covered in front of others, right? So that is something that is very, very, very important in our faith. In Islam, it's extremely important that we do that we make sure that we protect ourselves, that we don't expose parts of ourselves that are not considered to be appropriate, right? Other parts, of haya are, which we'll talk about later, inshallah, as well, are using foul language, right? So, or acting disrespectfully in front of elders, right? So these are things that kind of give us a sense as to what haya means. So really, in a sense, it's really our it's a moral compass that we have inside of us. It's this feeling inside that Allah has given us, that we should feel uncomfortable. We shouldn't like situations that are improper. We shouldn't like to hear things that are improper. And also, we should make sure to protect ourselves from exposing ourselves to things that are improper as well. So hopefully that gives us a good idea as to what this means. And again, there's so much we could talk about with haya, but inshallah, this is just a good start. Okay, so here's one thing that we wanted to start with, inshallah, that is a really nice example of the Prophet ﷺ's haya, his modesty. And this is a beautiful story that some of you may have heard before. It's a miraculous story, and that is a story of the night journey in the Ascension, also known as the Isra and the Mi'raj. It's a beautiful part of our history in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave the Prophet ﷺ this beautiful gift, where he traveled in a miraculous way from Mecca to Jerusalem. And he did this in a miraculous way. It's a very long journey. He rode on his animal, the buraq, which is a majestic creature. And so Allah allowed this to happen, where he traveled all the way to Jerusalem. And then from Jerusalem, and we see the picture of the Dome of the Rock here, which is where he actually ascended. He ascended from the Dome of the Rock, from Jerusalem, up to the seven heavens to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what is known to be one of the most miraculous and important parts of our history. And one of the reasons why it's so important, there's many reasons why. One of the reasons why that day is so important is when we began to have the daily salah, the daily prayer prescribed to us, right? So, which of course for us now, as we know our faith, it's one of the most important parts of our faith, is to turn to Allah 5 times a day, no matter what we're doing. If we're busy with schoolwork, if we're in class, if we're hanging out with our friends, whatever it is, we always have to stop and take that time to make sure that we're praying all of our 5 daily prayers on time, right? But the story with the Isra and Mi'raj is really interesting, because initially Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually prescribed 50 prayers per day for the Muslims, 50, right? So that is amazing. And of course, in Allah in his wisdom, he knew that we're going to end up with 5, but that was the process that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala went through with the Prophet ﷺ, where initially that was the command, is to have the ummah, the community of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, pray 50 prayers per day. So the Prophet ﷺ, as he was going back down towards earth, then he was talking to Prophet Musa alayhi salam. Prophet Musa alayhi salam, every time he would hear about how many prayers were prescribed. So initially when he heard that it was 50, he said, you need to go back to Allah, ask Allah to make that lower, because that's going to be too much for your community. And then the Prophet ﷺ kept on going back and kept on going back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, until that amount was reduced to 5 prayers per day. And that is what we of course pray today: our Fajr, our Dhuhr, our Asr, our Maghrib, and our Isha. So even after the Prophet ﷺ came back to Musa alayhi with 5 prayers, Musa alayhi said, no, go back to your Lord, go back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because 5 is going to be too much for your community. So it was actually the haya, it was the modesty of the Prophet ﷺ. He had this beautiful inner state where he was so aware of that interaction with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that he could not go back to Allah for more. He couldn't ask for less prayers after that point. So it was that's another way we think about the term haya, is that we have this presence in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, and that is a good reminder for us as well. While we of course don't have that same experience, that experience was reserved for the Prophet ﷺ, we do have an experience of being in front of Allah, right? So when we are praying our salah, when we are doing our dhikr, whenever we're doing any form of worship, then we have to think that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in front of us, right? So that means that making sure that we bring our best selves, right? So for example, if we're outside in the driveway, playing basketball, and we're like wearing our shorts and a t-shirt, for example, and we're all sweaty and it's time for salah, it's good to take an extra couple of minutes, go and wash up and freshen up, maybe put on something a little bit nicer, and then pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's that idea of having that presence with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So even this is a really beautiful example of how the Prophet ﷺ had that haya, that modesty, with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, so another thing that is a really beautiful story that's mentioned in this book, is this the story that some of you may have heard before. It's a very, very common story that we learn, and it's a beautiful, beautiful story that if we hear it over and over again, there's different lessons that we can learn from this story. And this is about the idea of protecting other people's modesty, right? So haya is not just for ourselves, but our job as Muslims is to make sure that we help other people as well. So we don't want anyone's immodesty to be exposed. If anything, we want to make sure that if our friends or family members or even strangers, we want to make sure that the same modesty that we have, we want to make sure that they are also, that their modesty is also protected as well, right? So the Prophet ﷺ, in his beautiful, beautiful character, he didn't like to confront people regarding issues that he felt would hurt their feelings, right? So for example, if somebody did something wrong, he didn't want them to feel bad about what they did, but rather he wanted to inspire them with beautiful teachings, with forgiveness, with good examples as to how they could do something better, how they could do something differently, right? And that is a beautiful, beautiful example of what we can learn as we correct people. So if we see somebody doing something wrong, if we see somebody perhaps not behaving in a modest way, if we approach them, with harshness, or if we approach them with anger, we know that that's not going to really help, right? If anything, it may drive that person further away from what they should be doing, right? So the example we learn from Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is that if we teach with love, if we teach with compassion, then that's how we bring people closer and closer towards how they should be. So this story is something that we've heard, and it's a beautiful story, and it comes to us from Abu Huraira, one of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, where he said that a desert Arab stood up and urinated in the mosque of the Prophet ﷺ, and people were really, really, really upset, and they made him feel really, really bad about what he did. Right. So again, if we think about this example, like when, like I don't think the term desert Arab is meant to necessarily make fun of the person. It's really to help us understand that maybe this person is somebody who had different customs, somebody who had different ways of doing things, different ways of how they were raised, and what type of communities that they lived in. So we're all products, we're all made from the people that were around us, right? So this person may not have had good examples in their life. So this person came to the masjid. He came to the masjid of the Prophet والسلام, and he urinated, which is very, very shocking. It's a very, very shocking thing that I'm sure that was seen by people. And what the companions did when they acted in they were very upset and they made him feel bad. It's something that we think about is maybe that's not something. Maybe a lot of us would do that as well, right? We're all human. We all maybe react in ways that we shouldn't react sometimes. But the Prophet ﷺ, he taught us all how to be better people, right? He taught us all how we can improve our lives in every single way. So when he saw his companions making this person feel bad, then instead he reminded them, and he said, leave this person alone. Just leave this person alone. Just pour a bucket of water over it so it purifies, the masjid. And he said that you have been raised as a community that makes things easy, and we're not sent forth to make things difficult. So this is advice that he gave us. He gave his companions at the time. He said that we have to make things easy for people, right? We don't want to make things difficult. We don't want to make this person feel bad for what they did. There's a way that we can explain it to him later. Let him do what he needs to do. We'll make sure and take care of cleaning the masjid. And then there's a way we could talk to this person afterwards, explain to them that, in order to relieve yourself, here's what we do, right? And explain to them the right way of doing things. And this is another beautiful example of how the Prophet ﷺ was so keen on just protecting the modesty of other people. So another thing to point out when we think about modesty is just more examples of how we can learn from the example of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Now we've talked about this in other parts of the chapter. When we talk about the character of the Prophet ﷺ, he was the person who had the absolute best character. Character is why is one of the things that we take from him from our religion, right? It's so important that he actually said that he was only sent to perfect human character, right? It was one of the reasons that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent him. So modesty is a big part of that, right? So we talked earlier about these things, right? So having haya, having modesty means that we follow the example of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and don't use any bad language. This has unfortunately become a really, really big problem in society today. And we hope, inshallah, that this doesn't impact the Muslim community too much. But unfortunately, we know that, it does. It's just a matter of, living in society. We're influenced by people that are around us. So bad language is something that unfortunately is becoming more and more common. And people, perhaps don't feel uncomfortable anymore with bad language. And that is a very, very big problem that inshallah we can learn from the example of Prophet Muhammad والسلام, and understand that having haya, having modesty, part of that means that we speak with beautiful language. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us with language. Language is something that comes from Allah. That doesn't mean just Arabic. That means English as well. That means whatever language you may speak at home. These are words that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us. And we know the right words to say. And we know the words that we should not be saying. So part of modesty is making sure that we completely avoid bad language. But probably just as important as avoiding bad language is that we have to feel uncomfortable with bad language. So if we hear people that are using bad language, then we should feel uncomfortable in our heart, and we should try to remove ourselves from that situation. I have examples of this in my when I was a child, but I also have experiences like this when I'm an adult as well, where there are times when I've had to walk away, and I've had people actually come and thank me afterwards, saying that we really appreciate, that you did that, because we realized maybe we weren't using the right language. And that's not to say that I'm perfect. By any means, that's not the case. I need these reminders more than anybody else. But it's just a reminder that I wanted to share, that I think people really appreciate, having good language spoken. And there's something about bad language that's very, very unnatural and very immodest, right? So inshallah, we could try to follow the example of our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who never ever used bad language, and he always taught us to use the best words. He also never raised his voice either, right? So this is part of modesty as well. It's not an honorable, quality to raise our voice. We talked about this before as well, as that the Prophet ﷺ would also never respond to someone's bad behavior in the same way, right? So again, this is another human, characteristic. Sometimes we maybe see our classmates or our cousins or our siblings, they're doing something, and our response is we want to respond back in the same way. And then maybe like, your parents, they say, well, why did you do that? Well, that person said that to me, so I'm going to respond back with them. I'm going to respond back to them in the same way. It's a very natural thing. It doesn't make you a bad person. Astaghfirullah, not at all. It just means that we're human, right? But we learn from the example of the best person that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent to us, and he would never respond back in the same way, but instead he would forgive that person completely. Pardon them. Pardon means that not only you forgive, but that means that you forget that it even happened, right? So this is something we can all learn from. Again, these are hard things to do, especially, like when we're young, and sometimes, we want to, give something back equal as to what we got from someone else. And it doesn't mean we're going to change this overnight, but hopefully we could learn and try to do a little bit better every single day, inshallah. This other part I wanted to mention is really, really beautiful, is that when someone did something wrong, he would not fix his gaze upon that person. What that means is that he wouldn't stare that person down. Instead, he would look down at the ground. Now think about that for a second. How many times have we, and I'm speaking for myself, as I've said before, I'm not perfect at all. How many times have we been upset about something and we just like stare at that person until they feel so bad about what they did, right? The Prophet ﷺ would not do that, right? He wouldn't fix his gaze upon the person, but rather he would just look down. And imagine the power and the beauty in doing that, right? I think the person would automatically know what they did was wrong. They would feel bad about it, but not because we made them feel bad, because they felt bad on their own. It's a beautiful, beautiful characteristic, and something we can hopefully take from today's lesson, inshallah, and try to do this as well. Now, the next thing that it's important to point out is modesty or haya. It doesn't mean that you are shy to speak up, right? Those are two very, very different things, and we shouldn't confuse the two. So while the Prophet ﷺ had this beautiful modesty, both inward modesty and outward modesty, he was also very, very strong and very, very courageous, the strongest person and the most courageous person that ever walked on the face of the earth. Right. So whenever there's something that he had to do, whether it was to make sure that Allah's justice is carried out, to make sure that if something is wrong, that it has to be fixed, he would always be the first one to speak out. But the key thing is that we do it with kindness. We do it with humility. We do it with understanding that people are human. And in the end of the day, if we're trying to change the way people are, then we have to go to their hearts first before making them feel bad. So the next part I wanted to cover, inshallah, is just about learning Islam. There's so much beauty in how, if we learn Islam with modesty, then inshallah, that's something that we could, it can go to our hearts much, much, much faster. So there's some really good examples that are shared in this book, specifically around the women of Medina, right? So the Prophet ﷺ, as I mentioned in the hadith later, that he actually praised the women of Medina because they were so modest, yet they also had the confidence to approach the Prophet ﷺ to ask about very personal matters related to hygiene and worship, right? So for example, yes, we have to be mindful, like I mentioned earlier about having haya when it comes to not exposing our parts of our body or not using foul language and all these things. Those are all important, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try to learn Islam. And sometimes learning Islam, we have to ask the tough questions, right? And that goes back to the idea of being courageous and whatnot. So the women of Medina, they were the people that had the absolute best character. They had the best haya, modesty, but they also wanted to learn their religion. So they made it a point to always learn their religion, but in the most beautiful and modest way possible. And there's no better example of this than the wife of the Prophet ﷺ, Aisha. So we know hadith, of course, are the sayings of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, as we know. So hadith, the way they come to us is there are people that collected hadith after the time of the Prophet ﷺ. When they collected the hadith, then there was basically like a very clear what they call a transmission, right? So for example, somebody heard the Prophet ﷺ say something. And they would document that. It's a beautiful way of how our religion is preserved. So Aisha radiallahu anha, wife of the Prophet ﷺ, was one of the most prolific people when it came to documenting these sayings of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, because she had, of course, advantages of being with him and living with him, right? So she documented a lot of things. She narrated so many hadith, very strong, not just a strong woman, just a strong person and somebody we could all learn from. And she taught many companions. She taught her the male companions of the Prophet ﷺ. She taught the female companions of the Prophet ﷺ, and she taught for many years. And she was a very strong, very articulate, very intelligent person who taught many companions, but she did so with extreme, modesty and just absolutely, beautiful character. So even the way that we learn Islam, we do so with modesty, but we also have to understand that we have to try our best to learn the things that we have to learn. And sometimes that means, asking a lot of questions. That means asking questions that maybe, like we're a little bit shy to ask, but we have to ask anyway because we want to learn, right? So I remember, years ago, like when I was, studying with one of my teachers, and I asked him, I said, I have a hard time waking up for Fajr. And I have a hard time concentrating in prayer. And I would just bare my soul asking questions, like I was already in my 20s, and I let him know that, can you give me some some advice, give me some teachings. How could I learn to be better? So we have to ask sometimes questions like that to help people, help us understand how to follow our religion in the best way, inshallah. Okay, so here's what I have for this week, inshallah, with the last 2 minutes that we have remaining, for what we can try for this week. So we all have people in our lives that we have hayat towards, right? So, say for example, that we're all human, like we said. We act in a certain way, maybe with our parents, but then we act in a different way, maybe with our friends. And act in a different way maybe towards our siblings. And maybe we act in a different way, towards our classmates, right? Which is totally normal. That's very normal. But one of the ways that we could try to practice haya is to try to think, when is it that we have our best version of haya, our best version of being modest, right? So, for example, you may have someone in your life, maybe it's a grandparent, maybe it's an uncle or an aunt, or maybe it's your Quran teacher or your Islamic studies teacher, or the imam at your local masjid or whatever it may be. So when we are are interacting with that person, it's very different, isn't it? It's a very different interaction, which is a good thing, and that's a blessing. And we should not, don't feel like you're two-faced when you're doing that, because that's a good thing. It's a good thing that we know how to act in certain situations. That's a good quality. So don't feel bad about that. But it's a good example as to how we perhaps know the best ways to display modesty, right? You know, so maybe, for example, you know, going back to the basketball example, maybe you can use other examples, you know, like, is that if you're going to go talk to a teacher or a grandparent, uncle or aunt, you would just, you know, try to dress a little bit better. You know, maybe you want to make sure, and, you know, like, you know, that you have good hygiene. You want to make sure maybe that if you're with your friends and you're maybe a little bit rough, you know, with your language or with your interactions, but when you're with these other people, you're a little bit softer, right? You have a more gentle disposition. You try to have more haya, right? So the lesson I thought of for this week is something that maybe we can try out, is that maybe we could try to display that same level of haya with others, with our parents, our siblings, our classmates, etc. Again, this doesn't have to mean you have to absolutely change everything, but it's a good way for us to think about haya, modesty, and how maybe there's ways that we can improve. And then maybe as we start thinking about what this means and how we could improve ourselves, and make sure that we develop that moral compass where we could try and be more uncomfortable with things that are not good for us, for our hearts. And that means, for example, going back to the example of you know, being around people that perhaps don't use the best language, you know, people that don't have the best character. So for us to try to inwardly think about that, and then outwardly try our best to increase our level of haya every single day. So I think we're right at time. We're actually 1 minute past, so I apologize. Sidi Siraj, anything you want to add, inshallah?
No, mashallah, that was beautiful. A beautiful lesson. Arif. Jazakumullah.
Okay, alhamdulillah. Thank you again, everyone, for being part of this journey with us. We really appreciate everyone. You know, we look forward to continuing next week with the Shama'il with Sidi Siraj, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.